What's wrong with this guy? That's not the guy we know. And it's exactly what that was. It was a glitch. It was a huge mistake. After everything I've been through, I want to knock somebody out.
He was wrestling's biggest star, the immortal icon in red and yellow. But behind the glory, Hulk Hogan held on to deep grudges. Before his death, he revealed a list, not of the wrestlers he respected, but the 6 he couldn't stand. Some were bitter rivals, others unexpected names that shocked even close friends. One feud nearly ended in a lawsuit. Another was all mockery, right in front of a live crowd. What did they do to earn his hatred? And why only these 6? The answers might change how you see them, and him. Vince Russo. For decades, Hulk Hogan was the immovable object of professional wrestling. From Madison Square Garden to the Monday Night Wars, Hogan dominated the spotlight, usually with the full support of promoters behind him. But in 2000, one man dared to challenge that empire, not in the ring, but with a microphone and a script. Vince Russo, a controversial and polarizing figure in wrestling's creative world, didn't just butt heads with Hogan. He launched a full-blown war that shattered kayfabe and triggered one of the most infamous backstage explosions in wrestling history. Vince Russo had built his name as the creative force behind WWE's Attitude Era, helping launch stars like The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin into mainstream fame. But when he jumped to WCW in 1999, he found himself working with an aging roster, backstage politics, and one looming force: Hulk Hogan. For years, Hogan had wielded immense creative control over his character and storylines, often protected by a clause in his contract that gave him final say on match outcomes. Russo, determined to shake things up and elevate younger talent, quickly found himself clashing with the biggest name in the business. The tension boiled over at Bash at the Beach 2000, a pay-per-view that was supposed to feature Hogan defending the WCW World title against Jeff Jarrett. What happened instead stunned everyone, including the fans. When the bell rang, Jarrett lay down in the ring and Hogan, clearly confused, stood over him, microphone in hand. "This is why this company is in the damn shape it's in," Hogan said before pinning Jarrett with one foot and walking off with the belt. That should have ended the show. But Russo wasn't done. He came back out, live on air, and cut a scathing, unscripted promo calling Hogan out for using his creative control to play his politics. He stripped Hogan of the title right there and claimed that would be the last time fans ever saw Hulk Hogan in WCW. Even that was a direct shot over Hogan's immense ego. It also struck a death blow to his legacy. Russo accused Hogan of holding down younger talent with some actual names attached to his accusations and breaking the fourth wall in a way uncannily rare in wrestling. This promo was not planned, nor was it included in any of the storylines to which Hogan might have agreed. The aftershocks came immediately. Hulk rushed his case against both Russo and WCW with a defamation lawsuit. In the after interviews, he made Russo's head roll by calling him an amateur and claimed that he slayed WCW through all those wacky storylines and swerves that had totally disrespected the established stars. Russo fired back, saying that the real reason WCW was not able to build new stars was because Hogan refused to lose clean. This was no longer just business, but personal. The lawsuit eventually fizzled, but the bitterness remained. Shortly after the Bash incident, Hogan basically disappeared from WCW, and within a year, the company itself dissolved and was bought by WWE. Many fans and insiders tracked the moment when WCW completely lost control all the way back to Bash at the Beach 2000. The Hogan camp would claim that Russo's ego and chaotic writing actually precipitated the demise of WCW. On the other hand, Russo's supporters argue that he was the only one brave enough to buck a fading star, unwilling to relinquish the spotlight. Either way, both men suffered irrevocably in their legacies. As for WCW, its reputation never recovered. To date, Hulk Hogan seldom speaks about Vince Russo without the application of a healthy dose of venom. In subsequent interviews, Hogan described Vince Russo as one who had no idea what he was doing, stating that every move Russo made was to get himself over, not the wrestlers. Russo also continued to take potshots at Hogan, accusing him of hypocrisy and cowardice. Their feud never made it into the ring, but in terms of real-life drama, it may have matched, if not surpassed, many of Hogan's in-ring rivalries. For a man who has battled giants, monsters, and villains, Hulk Hogan's most vicious opponent may have been a man with a pen. The confrontation became far more explosive, since Russo not only questioned Hogan's handling of creative angles, but also challenged Hogan's legacy. For decades, Hogan had maintained an image of heroism and loyalty, whereas Russo clocked him between the eyes with a sledgehammer and a live microphone. In that moment, Russo didn't just anger Hogan. He gave the fans a glimpse of the other side of the curtain. If you thought clashing with a writer was wild, wait until it's one of wrestling's purest technicians. Bret Hart. In the golden age of professional wrestling, Hulk Hogan stood at the center of the storm, the red and yellow face of the business, larger than life, and seemingly untouchable. But not everyone saw Hulkamania through the lens of admiration. Bret the Hitman Hart, known for his precision in the ring and cold honesty outside of it, once idolized Hogan. He respected the spotlight Hogan helped bring to the industry. But over time, that respect curdled into resentment. Not because Hogan beat him in the ring, but because of what he did outside it. To Bret Hart, Hulk Hogan wasn't just a colleague. He became the symbol of everything wrong behind the curtain. Their relationship began quietly in the shadows of the main event. In the late 80s and early 90s, Hart was rising through the ranks as a tag team specialist turned singles competitor. Hogan was the golden boy, headlining WrestleManias, making movies, and riding a wave of unmatched popularity. By the early 90s, Vince McMahon had started building a new generation of stars, with Bret Hart at the forefront. In 1992, Hart won the WWF Championship, signaling a shift. Hogan was fading, and Bret was the future. At least, that's what Bret believed. Then came WrestleMania 9, a night that Bret still considers one of the most bitter moments of his career. Bret walked in as champion, set to face the monstrous Yokozuna. After a hard-fought match, Yokozuna won, thanks to interference from Mr. Fuji. But before Bret could even stand up, Hogan stormed to the ring. Moments later, Hogan pinned Yokozuna in an impromptu match and walked out as champion. Bret didn't know it was happening. He wasn't told Hogan would take his spotlight. And just like that, Hart's momentum was erased in front of a live audience. That wasn't a match. It was a hijacking. Backstage, they had informed Bret that this was all part of the plan. Hogan would return the favor and drop the title back to him at SummerSlam '93. Bret waited, and instead of a torch passing, Hogan dropped the title to Yokozuna again, this time in an agreed-upon match. Bret was not even in the conversation. Some years after, Hart disclosed that Hogan refused to work with him one-on-one. According to Bret, Hogan didn't think the match would draw. For Hogan, it stood not on performance. It stood on control. That was Bret's view of it too, and for him, that was betrayal. Betrayal not just of trust, but also of what wrestling was supposed to be. After that, things were really torn up. Bret went on record about what he thought about Hogan in interviews, documentaries, and his autobiography, calling Hogan a phony, selfish, and a master manipulator, who used his power to safeguard his own image by trampling over the careers of others. In Bret's estimation, Hogan lent a hand to people in his circle, Brutus Beefcake or Jim Dugan for that matter, mainly. Hogan rarely responded directly, though. However, when he did, he dismissed Bret as a guy who took himself too seriously and was no actual draw at all. "Bret didn't understand the bigger picture," said Hogan once. "He couldn't get over like I could." These two legends never had their match. They never shared a major program, never even found common ground at any time. Bret Hart has been inducted into the Hall of Fame, during which he has won championship titles and posed as the main event at WrestleMania, and has earned respect from fans and peers for his authenticity. Meanwhile, Hogan, who was already deeply rooted in pop culture, continued to beam brightly in the mainstream spotlight. Yet somehow, their rivalry, silent and simmering, became one of the most compelling what-ifs in professional wrestling. It was not fought in the ring, but rather in broken promises and pulled plans, along with words uttered long after. In wrestling, some rivalries end with handshakes. This one ended with a wall of silence, and the legacy of two very different men built on the same stage. It was no less than principle that lent Bret's frustration a far greater measure than jealousy. Hart wanted fairness, not Hogan's stardom. In Bret's world, wrestling was all about hard work, telling stories, and getting the recognition. In Hogan's world, it was all about politics, positioning, and pulling strings. This philosophical separation went deeper than title shots or television time. It had to do with a fundamental denial of everything Bret believed wrestling should be. Hence, for Bret, it was a personal, not merely a professional, betrayal. Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels wasn't just a performer, he was the performer. Charismatic, technically flawless, and always 2 steps ahead in the ring, he earned the nickname Mr. WrestleMania for a reason. But for all his talent, Michaels also had a reputation for being outspoken and unpredictable, especially when he felt disrespected. So when he finally stood across the ring from Hulk Hogan, the man who defined an entire generation of wrestling, fans expected magic. What they got instead was a match fueled by real tension, backstage politics, and one of the most bizarre performances in WWE history. Back in 2005, the idea of Hogan versus Michaels was pure fantasy booking gold. Hogan, the immortal icon of the 80s. Michaels, the edgy star of the 90s. 2 eras, 1 ring. But behind the scenes, things unraveled quickly. According to Michaels, the original plan was simple, a trilogy of matches. Hogan would win one, Michaels the next, and the third would settle it all. But Hogan allegedly changed the deal. He wanted one match, and he wanted to win. For Michaels, who had returned to WWE with a changed outlook after years of personal struggle, it felt like a slap in the face. At SummerSlam 2005, the bell rang, and Michaels went off script in the most theatrical way possible. Instead of wrestling a competitive match, he oversold Hogan's offense to the point of parody. A basic punch sent him flipping. A boot launched him across the ring. Clotheslines had him bouncing like a cartoon character. To casual fans, it was confusing. To wrestling insiders, it was clear. This was revenge, done live and in real time. Michaels was mocking Hogan, and he wasn't being subtle about it. Seemingly far from being over, the feud continued the very next night on Raw when Michaels walked into the ring dressed as Hogan. Red and yellow attire, dimmed with fake tan, accentuated by over-the-top mannerisms. He then cut a promo ridiculing Hogan's voice, walk, and catchphrases, forcing the crowd's laughter to become more sinister. The message was crystal clear. Michaels had felt used. and now he would not be silenced about it. In regard to Hogan, he never once offered a response in public. After winning the match, he would walk away from WWE and a situation like this one, leaving all of it behind him. Years later, Michaels would look back with some regret. He admitted the overselling was petty and unprofessional, but it arose from a real place. He felt betrayed by Hogan's backstage antics and felt that the business deserved better. For his part, Hogan very rarely addressed Michaels directly, but did say in interviews that he thought the whole thing was strange. Some of Hogan's defenders said Michaels was just bitter about losing. Others said he was just tired of seeing Hogan change the rules to benefit himself. Whatever the case, their once-in-a-lifetime match became a one-time-only deal for reasons far removed from act. The Hogan-Michaels feud ranks as one of pro wrestling's more surreal rivalries, nowhere in the light of violence or duration, but rather for its unadulterated honesty. In a world built on illusion, however, these two icons allowed the illusion to slip just long enough for the fans to see the ego, the pride, and the politics behind the curtain. They were icons, they were great showmen, but that night they saw things differently. And almost 2 decades later, that match remains etched in our minds, not for any expectations that it had set, but rather for an unexpected outcome that shattered these expectations when two of wrestling's biggest names ceased all pretenses and began unleashing real punches. The whole fascinating sight was enhanced with the rarity with which one found someone like Michaels, who himself had once been political, take an open stand against it. This wasn't the boisterous heartbreak kid of the 90s who would do any number of things just to stir trouble. This was a veteran performer expressing his feelings in the only language Hogan could understand: performance. Michaels wanted to get back at Hogan in front of everybody. The way he felt that the audience and the company were forced to experience a system in which everything ends the way it is supposed to, with complete lack of respect. Keep your seatbelt fastened, because this next clash goes from shocking to almost absurd. Billy Kidman. In the world of WCW's late-stage chaos, Billy Kidman was never meant to be a main event threat. With no flashy muscles or over-the-top gimmick, Kidman represented something rare, a quiet workhorse with real in-ring skill. While others soared on mic time and backstage connections, Kidman made his name the hard way, match by match, bump by bump. But in 2000, amid one of WCW's wildest creative spirals, Kidman did the unthinkable. He called out Hulk Hogan, the face of the business, in front of millions. And for a brief moment, it looked like David might actually step into the ring with Goliath. The feud was sparked by Vince Russo, who had just taken over WCW's creative direction and wanted to shake up the status quo. Tired of aging stars holding on to power, Russo used Kidman as a mouthpiece to call Hogan out, not just in storyline, but in spirit. On live TV, Kidman accused Hogan of playing politics, burying talent, and protecting his spot at the expense of the company's future. Fans were stunned. For years, these were whispers behind the curtain. Now, a cruiserweight was saying it out loud and pointing the finger directly at the Immortal One. Hogan, of course, responded, both in character and with his usual swagger. He laughed off Kidman's words, mocked his size, and declared he wasn't even in his league. Still, the match was booked. Hogan versus Kidman. On paper, it was madness. In reality, it was politics. In one of their encounters, Hogan no-sold Kidman's offense like it was a mosquito bite. Punches, kicks, even chair shots, nothing fazed him. And when it came time for the finish, Hogan dropped the leg and pinned Kidman with ease. No drama, no build. Just a reminder of who still ran the show. The backstage scene was rife with contradictions. Russo was adamant that it was time to elevate fresh stars. However, Hogan still had creative control written into his contract and was not about to cleanly lose to anyone he did not regard as a main eventer. Kidman was positioned right in between, doing his part by delivering verbal blows and taking the bruises. The talk among the fans and insiders alike was that although Hogan lost due to Eric Bischoff's interference, it was not a passing of the torch moment, but rather an act by Hogan to let the fire flicker for a while to show the world who could put it out. Years later, Kidman spoke of the feud realistically, not bitterly. He said that he never expected to pin Hogan clean or look like the next big star. "I was just doing my job," Kidman stated. "I knew the deal." However, Kidman stood by his promos. What he said about Hogan is true. About younger talent being held back, about Hogan's influence backstage. For a moment, Kidman became the mouthpiece for the frustrated mid-card. While the storyline itself fizzled, he was not blind to the consequences of standing up to wrestling's biggest name. That angle between Hogan and Kidman is now remembered as one of those crazy experiments during the dying days of WCW, an ecstasy clash between a legend's ego and the last desperate gasp of a company attempting to shake the system. Ultimately, it did not elevate Kidman. It did not transform Hogan. But it revealed to an audience more in touch with reality than behind the curtain. Kidman never got the big push. Hogan never passed the torch. But for a few wild weeks in 2000, a cruiserweight stepped up and dared to punch up. And in doing so, he revealed just how deeply rooted Hulkamania is in power, not just popularity. What made the angle even more surreal was how out of place it felt, not just for Hogan, but for Kidman. In a company still clinging to cartoonish giants and old-school stars, Kidman was the complete opposite, low-key, unpolished, and never scripted to stand tall. Yet, that was the very reason why fans paid attention. He wasn't supposed to be there. He wasn't supposed to stand up, but did. Standing in the light, if only for an instant, Kidman revealed the uncomfortable truth. No one wanted to say it out loud. WCW's biggest problem is not its future, but rather, it was the past that seemed not to let go. Honky Tonk Man. In the late 1980s, the WWF was full of over-the-top characters, neon colors, and entrance music that could shake an arena. Few captured that energy quite like the Honky Tonk Man, guitar in hand, hair slicked back, and ego turned up to 11. He strutted to the ring like a rock and roll villain and proudly called himself the greatest intercontinental champion of all time. On paper, he and Hulk Hogan were perfect foils, both larger-than-life characters who could rile up a crowd with a single flex or taunt. But while fans expected fireworks, a feud between them never came. And Honky says that was no accident. Wayne Ferris, the man behind the Elvis-inspired heel, made a career out of getting heat. He wasn't the flashiest wrestler or the most athletic, but he understood how to work a crowd and how to protect his character. While Hogan was headlining WrestleMania, Honky was holding down the mid-card with long title reigns and memorable promos. They were never part of the same stories, even though they shared locker rooms and limelight during the WWF's biggest boom. And that omission, that deliberate distance, is what sparked years of tension between the two. Honky believed Hogan didn't want anything to do with him, not because of style, but because of control. In multiple interviews, Honky accused Hogan of blocking opportunities, especially for anyone he couldn't manipulate. "If you weren't one of his boys," Honky once said, "you weren't going anywhere near the top." Hogan's inner circle, filled with names like Brutus Beefcake, Jimmy Hart, and Hacksaw Jim Duggan, seemed to always have a place on the card. Honky, despite his popularity and heat, never got that favor. And over time, that slight turned into an open wound. The bitterness grew. Honky aimed for the character of Hogan in dozens of shoot interviews and podcasts. He called Hogan phony, overrated, and a backroom politician. Among one of his most infamous jabs, "All show, no go." In Honky's view, Hogan was protected by the system, not tested in the ring, and elevated through marketing rather than merit. To him, Hogan was a brand, not a wrestler. And while Honky may have played a gimmick too, he prided himself on being real when it counted. The contrast between them, the flashy hero and the grounded heel, became a rift that only widened with time. Hogan, meanwhile, rarely evinced the attacks. Hogan himself never even shot back in public. But those close to him said he considered Honky a bitter mid-carder, one who never made peace with his position in the pecking order. Whether that's true or not, fans couldn't help but notice that their paths never really crossed, even as both men remained fixtures in the WWE machine. For Honky, however, the snub told the tale. He believed Hogan actively worked to avoid the ring, spotlight, or stage that would have them face off, afraid, perhaps, that someone who did not play by his rules would upstage him. In retrospect, the irony cannot be ignored. Wrestling's two most over-the-top individuals, one a superhero and the other a jukebox villain, both never met when it mattered. No matches, no promos, nothing but silence and decades of resentment. Hulk Hogan was never pinned by the Honky Tonk Man. He was never spoken about in the ring. But that was not required. The feud was fought in interviews, shoot tapes, and bitter jibes. In that way, Honky secured a very strange niche in wrestling history. Not as the one who beat Hulk Hogan, but as one who never stopped swinging from outside the ring. More painful for Honky, they were often compared with each other. Similarly gimmicky, audience-interactive wrestlers who were far more dependent on character than wrestling prowess. While Hogan became immortalized as the face of the era, Honk was usually dismissed as a comic foil. That was more branding than booking. Honky felt that Hogan's brand of superstardom robbed others of their shine, including Honky himself. In Honky's mind, there was no room for two loud, obnoxiously colorful personas to coexist in the limelight. And Hogan made sure that only one of them stood in the spotlight. We're not done yet. The top name on the list didn't just hate Hogan, he questioned everything he stood for. CM Punk. CM Punk wasn't built like a typical wrestling superstar. No beach muscles, no blonde mane, no cheap catchphrases. He didn't smile for the cameras or play corporate games. Instead, he walked to the ring with defiance in his voice and a chip on his shoulder. A self-made star who told the truth, whether you liked it or not. And when it came to Hulk Hogan, Punk made one thing very clear. He didn't buy the hype, didn't respect the legacy, and had no interest in pretending otherwise. If Hogan was the symbol of wrestling's golden era, then CM Punk was the guy holding the sledgehammer. The tension between them didn't build through matches or storylines. It grew from opposite ends of the wrestling universe. Hogan stood for spectacle, for marketing, for being bigger than life, even if it meant stepping on others to get there. Punk stood for authenticity, hard work, grit, and speaking up when something didn't feel right. Where Hogan played hero on TV and politician backstage, Punk made it his mission to pull back the curtain. It wasn't personal at first, it was philosophical. But that didn't last long. In 2014, the divide became impossible to ignore. Punk was scheduled to appear in a backstage segment with Hogan at a WWE show promoting WrestleMania. According to insiders, Punk flat out refused. He didn't want to stand next to Hogan. He didn't want to be seen endorsing what Hogan represented. Around that same time, Punk lit up social media, tweeting that Hogan was a piece of garbage and accusing him of lying about his role in wrestling history. Fans were stunned and divided. Some backed Punk's honesty. Others saw it as unnecessary heat. The whole thing did not slide for Hogan. He decided to keep responding in interviews and via tweets, labeling Punk with descriptions of bitter, a loudmouth who couldn't draw flies, and whatnot, waving his hand dismissively at these alleged slights. Punk could just be said to have been angry about Hogan achieving some heights in his eyes. And so Hogan represented one perspective. The oft-heard refrain that Punk is jealous of the success Hogan enjoyed from WrestleMania to Hollywood. Punk's supporters would argue otherwise. They saw a generational clash where Hogan represented the glory days, while Punk was shedding light on the cracks beneath that glory. And unlike many who came before him, Punk wasn't afraid to burn bridges all along the way. The uniqueness of their feud lay in the fact that nothing really happened in and around a ring. Yet everything felt like the real thing. Punk took aim at Hogan's legacy, political dealings, and character regarding the locker room. Another of his comments about Hogan was that if he were around in modern day, nobody would stand for his crap. It wasn't just about one man for Punk. It was about a system that rewarded style over substance. Hogan's entire image was that of being indestructible, whereas Punk's whole purpose was to refute that. Years later, and the tension remains. Hogan is still the nostalgic icon of many fans, forever associated with the boom of professional wrestling. Punk, on the other hand, has taken on a different persona, one symbolic of rebellion, of challenging the establishment from the inside. They never had a common storyline. They never wrestled against each other. Yet, somehow, their feud stands as one of the most real in wrestling history. Two icons from different eras, one built on red and yellow fantasy, the other based in straight-edge reality. And in the end, it was never about winning a match. It was about standing your ground. And CM Punk never took a step back. Even beyond the headlines and interviews, Punk carried a hatred of Hogan in all his actions inside the ring and the locker room. While other wrestlers might have still whispered of admiration for the legends who paved the way, Punk kept questioning whether that path was meant for people like him. Not just Hogan in one instance, Punk rejected the entire blueprint Hogan represented. To Punk, the business needed changing, not old reminiscences. And from every promo, every podcast lunacy, every situation he could go off script, it could be pronounced loud and clear. Hogan was not the past Punk respected. Hogan was the past Punk wanted to shove off. If you enjoyed this deep dive into wrestling's untold stories, don't forget to like, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes drama. Got a favorite Hogan feud we didn't cover? Drop it below, and don't go anywhere. Click the next video on your screen for more shocking wrestling revelations.